ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы извинить, и что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Modern in the City. Ready ein in der Arbeitereinheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Ready ein in der Arbeitereinheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Pod słońcem rasti jasna dzieci, rasti i cvietaj zemljoradnih ljudi i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napučini i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjeta
утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along. It is the afternoon, as I said already, of the 20th of October, 2025, and we are here with you today for another live stream, but this time taking a slightly different tack, shall we say, in terms of the presentation. Now, we are starting from today a new series in terms of our presentation of this show, a new way of organizing it. So we're going to be going from today, doing free longer shows per week on this channel on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, which is going to be a combination of like review of various different news events, and then a political and educational discussion after the first hour or so, when we've discussed the stories of the day. Then, of course, we'll be going to be getting into listeners and viewers questions at the end of each episode. So new way of doing it, you like it, and we will be getting into the New York City mayoral debate, which I suffered through the other day, all 2 hours of that shit. So you have to suffer through it in summary form with me. They did throw up some rather interesting questions, particularly related to the strategy, so-called, of the DSA and the candidacy of Zohran Mamdani. So we'll be getting into that. There may be an Andrew Cuomo impression. There may even be a Curtis Sliwa impression, if you've come for that. Then we're going to be discussing the No Kings protests and what that might mean, if anything, and why the US left is getting very excited about it. And the DSA has been publishing various ludicrous claims, such as that they're taking on capitalism by doing this. More of that later. And then we're going to be looking at the AI bubble in the United States, which is, when you analyze it, much worse than it first appears. So that's going to be our news segment for today. Then there'll be a brief intermission, and we'll get on with the analysis and educational section. So first things first, we get into, of course, the mayoral debate that took place in New York last week between the Democratic Party's nominee, which is Zohran Mamdani, the so-called independent, Andrew Cuomo, who it should be foregrounded before you mention his name, credibly accused pervert, Andrew Cuomo, and wannabe, shall we say, wannabe Death Squad leader, Curtis Sliwa. I joke, of course. If anything, Mr. Sliwa was the most likable out of all three of them. Turning to this now, if you're not familiar with the various different aspects of the New York City mayoralty race, I think it's first important to understand a little bit about what New York City actually is in terms of its place within the structures, both political and economic, of New York, of U.S. imperialism. New York City, and again, it's a long time since I've been there myself. I last set foot in New York in 1997. It's a while ago now, where my dad took me to, as a 15-year-old, to see the golden entry point of Trump Tower, and told me that a bankrupt crook lived there, which is, of course, accurate. But New York itself operates, of course, given the presence of Wall Street, as the key financial center for U.S. imperialism. It's so it is a very crucial decision-making area, and where, of course, due to Wall Street, a lot of profit is generated there. It's also a sort of a prestige play in many respects, due to the presence of so much of the machinery of U.S. finance capital being based there or having significant operations there. So it's also a key, because of this economic center, it's a key decision-making center. It's arguably, and I'm aware that we might have Americans in the audience today who are going to argue differently, arguably the most important city in the United States, up there with places like Chicago in Illinois. I would say also Washington, D.C. itself. And I would also say maybe Los Angeles, for various different reasons. Perhaps one of the Texan cities, maybe Dallas, I'm not sure. But certainly Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Boston, maybe. But New York is arguably the most important out of all of them. So who gets to be mayor of this particular center of American imperialism matters a great deal to the wider American ruling class. And therefore, that's why it receives the colossal amount of media attention that it does. Now, if you over the course of New York history, there's been all kinds of rogues and incompetents and outright criminals who've occupied this key position. If we look at outright criminals, we can say Rudolph Giuliani being one of them, but he's far from alone. You've had various different incompetents be mayor of New York. such as the late John Lindsay, who's sort of a rogue Republican who later ran for the presidency as a Democrat. You've had very different chances get in on the act. You've had outright lunatics who are also very corrupt, such as Eric Adams. Never trust a vegan, by the way. And you get the impression that whilst this job is very important, it produces all kinds of strange characters who occupy it, various different eccentric figures who get elevated to national status. The people that the US ruling class would prefer to be in charge of New York would be Michael Bloomberg, basically. If we could have put Michael Bloomberg's brain in a jar and had him run New York in perpetuity, then they would have done so. Unfortunately, Michael Bloomberg was unwilling to do that. I mean, talk about lack of commitment to your class. And so they've had to go through, endure the blatherings of Bill de Blasio, the corruption and incompetence of Eric Adams, and now potentially the slimy, grinning buffoon that is Zohran Mamdani, or the sleazy wannabe Sopranos extra that is Andrew Cuomo, because it looks like it's between those two. Sliwa is probably not going to get a look in. Now, moving to the debate itself. First of all, on the structure of it, it was appallingly badly organized. They never gave any of the candidates a chance to actually expand beyond the soundbite, and I think that was quite deliberate as well. There was a clear bias towards it, making it a clash between Cuomo and Mamdani, with Sliwa essentially being marginalized. One has to be fair and say that. In terms of performance, now if you look at like the analysis of the what I'm going to call like the DSA left in the US media sphere, people like Uber clown Sam Cedar, that David Dole guy who I forgot existed until just the other day, various other like soft leftists, they're all ecstatic after this because they of course were convinced that Mamdani had won. I would say that having watched the whole thing, he gave the most assured performance out of the three. He was the smoothest. He hit his talking points well. He was confident. He projected the image of like a modern, very media proficient politician. So in terms of presentation, he won. He also didn't let the repeated and increasingly insane attempts to sort of unbalance him by Andrew Cuomo to succeed. He always responded and appeared smooth and unruffled when he was dealing with Cuomo. And I think that's because partly he obviously has the good skills to be like a media friendly politician. One has to say that. He also knows very well that the Democratic Party establishment has dumped Cuomo. That he's no longer acceptable. He's damaged goods. They can't be seen to be associated with him because not only did Mamdani win the Democratic primary quite handily, but Cuomo is associated with all manner of sleaze, corruption, and has been apparently spending tens of millions of dollars of public money on running a legal defense against sexual harassment claims. So not somebody that the Democratic Party establishment wants to be openly associated with anymore, even though, and this must gall Cuomo somewhat, he's very much embodied the Democratic Party establishment for decades because, as he mentioned repeatedly in the debate, his dad, Mario Cuomo, was, of course, a big figure in New York politics, New York state politics for many, many years as governor. And I found it rather funny when Cuomo said at one point, "This guy has never had a real job," pointing at Mamdani. He's never had a real job. He just interned for his mother, which is, true about Mamdani, but it's also true about Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo's entire miserable career depends upon being the son of Mario Cuomo, as does his even stupider brother, Chris, got now presenting a YouTube show. But Andrew Cuomo's entire political existence depends upon being Mario Cuomo's son. There's no other thing that Andrew Cuomo has going on for him than being the son of Mario Cuomo. So this is, a hypocritical joke from Cuomo. And again, Mamdani sort of eased his way around it. Now, so in terms of performance on the night, I should say, Mamdani won because he was the most capable and smooth performer on that stage. Cuomo looked bad-tempered. He looked rattled. He constantly saying, "Everybody's out to get me. Everybody. This is a disgrace. I have been cleared by every single investigation into me. That's why I spent $60 million of taxpayers' money to clear myself because I'm innocent," and just came across as a sleazy, unsympathetic dirtbag, basically. Sliwa came across as what he is, which is basically a talk show host, which is what he spent in actual fact most of his time doing. I mean, he did gain fame by leading this vigilante group from like the late 70s into the 80s called the Guardian Angels, which is a strange organization to say the least. Might be worth investigating it further. But he also apparently survived an attempt to kill him by John Gotti, the notorious and rather useless New York crime family figure, who's mainly famous for going to prison. But Sliwa at least came across as like a sort of authentic New York character. The other two, slimy and creepy, equal measure. Now, the fact that Mamdani has been embraced by Barack Obama, by Kamala Harris, and almost the entirety of the Democratic Party hierarchy, not only means that, of course, they have to respect the winner of their primary, but then again, when has the Democratic Party hierarchy ever bothered about democracy? It means that his embrace by them means that they see that route, partially at least, as being a means to revive their wretched party. They've sat down with Mamdani, and again, the people who make these judgments aren't entirely stupid. They've talked to him, they've looked at him, they've worked out that he and his wretched organization, the DSA, present absolutely no challenge whatsoever to the normal business as usual in New York City. Absolutely no challenge whatsoever. And the fact that the media now in the United States is favoring him. Like he goes on The View, for Christ's sake, and gets like an easy ride. So there's clear that an assessment has been made of Mamdani, and he's been found to be one of the guys. He's been found to be a good pair of hands, should we say, or a safe pair of hands. And even in the debate itself, it was clear that whilst the moderators were pushing for it to just be Cuomo versus Mamdani, they were leaning towards Mamdani. And again, like you stick anybody next to Andrew Cuomo, anybody would become sympathetic by comparison. But it's clear that the political and Democratic Party aligned establishment has decided that Mamdani is a guy they can do business with. And this leads us to think about, well, what about all these promises that he's making? What about the promises of free bus travel? What about his commitment to like subsidized grocery stores and stuff like that? Now, if you noticed in the debate, the one time that he got caught out, but it was never pressured on it, was when he was questioned about the funding arrangements for the free bus travel. And he admitted that it would require a tax raising decision to be made at the state level. And of course, Hochul, the current governor of New York State, with a sort of creepy, glassy-eyed expression, vowed that there's going to be no tax rises. And I doubt that that's going to change, even if Hochul isn't there anymore. And so Mamdani's one of his big commitments does risk basically being crippled by the fact that the New York state Democrats won't go for it, and certainly the New York state Republicans will vote against it. So this is an area where he could have been caught out, but the debate was set up as to rapidly move. So whenever, like, Cuomo should have been eviscerated for his record as governor, particularly over the question of like how he handled the COVID in New York, particularly the large amounts from COVID of elderly people in care homes. I mean, that was not just Cuomo. That was a lot of politicians in the West made the same decision: shove a lot of elderly people who'd been in hospital care into care homes and basically turn them into infection centers and kill a load of them, which is what Cuomo has done. You know, he sat there going, "I was found to not have done anything wrong whatsoever by killing all of those old fucks," you know. But he clearly should have been questioned more closely about that in the debate, and wasn't, because of the way that the debate was set up. Just as Mamdani should have been questioned a lot more closely about the fact that a key part of his platform relies upon tax increasing carried out by New York State government, which probably won't get through. So, but again, no questioning. No question was raised that could have like probed further on the weaknesses of any of these people. It's like Sleewer was able to get away with saying all kinds of crazy shit about like he would solve the housing crisis in New York by utilizing unused properties and stuff like that and not building anything more. Mamdani was able to get away with an equally, in my view, evasive answer on housing policy. So, for instance, they were talking about housing policy, and like Mamdani came out with basically the same answer that Keir Starmer comes out with here, which is that it's it's just a question of planning laws. I will build, I think he said, 200,000 new homes by essentially, and I'll make sure that the private sector can build quicker. Yeah. He just going back over my notes here. Mamdani said he was going to build 200,000 truly affordable homes. Now, if you think about that, like statement, like sounds pleasing to the ear, right? But you need to dive into, well, what does truly affordable mean? Truly affordable on what wage scale? Truly affordable to whom? Again, like he wasn't pressed on that question, which he should have been. And also, like, he should have been pressed on his question about the reason why builders in New York City in the private sector aren't building homes. He said it was a matter of planning laws, which is, again, like, this is the stuff that Keir Starmer comes out with. Now, the reality of why the private sector doesn't build is because the private sector benefits greatly from a situation where housing supply is restricted. It's choked off, meaning that the existing housing stock gets valued higher. Less supply, more demand, higher prices. And the only way you're going to get out of that, really, is not by building, as Mamdani says, affordable homes. Again, the question of affordability, he needed to be pressed on that question. He wasn't, of course, because the moderators have no interest in pressing him on that question. And Cuomo revealed himself to be a complete political incompetent, because he kept going back to Cuomo revealed that he's never had to actually deal with this kind of like debate, because there's all kind of weak points in Mamdani's policies that you could press on. So you could like press him on the question of, well, what is affordability? You could press him on the question of like, well, how's he going to actually enforce this private sector rent control that he's talking about? You could have pressed him. He could have been pressed further on the question of like, how's he going to get the tax raises through? So this is where, like, it was revealed that Cuomo is actually an incredibly bad politician. He's literally made his way through New York and national politics by being Mario Cuomo's son, and he's never had to actually face up to a challenge. And he just kept going back rather than actually questioning Mamdani on areas that he could have been exposed as being weak on, or it could have been he could have exposed him as having policies that were not as solid as they looked, because Mamdani's presentation was very smooth and convincing. You press on it, still like a severe weakness there. So Cuomo, being a sleazy establishment buffoon, kept going back to, and the Jews, they don't feel safe with him. Me, I love the Jews. I've kissed the wall repeatedly, and he kept saying, he's Hamas. Why won't he denounce Hassan fucking Piker? Which, again, like, how many New Yorkers actually know who Hassan fucking Piker is? My bet is probably less than 1% know who the fuck that guy is. And yet, like, Cuomo makes him like the centerpiece of his attack, or one of the centerpieces of his attack, along with basically saying, this guy loves 9/11. He's basically Osama bin Laden. It's like ridiculous, because that's going to have the least actual impact on the on the audience, I would imagine. But like, the basic one of the basic rules of like politics is that you should really try and attack your opponent where he's actually strongest. This is because the assumption behind Mamdani's campaign is that his commitments, these various social democratic commitments, are, understandably, they're popular with some people. But Cuomo is such an incompetent that he couldn't even probe into the weak points there. So Cuomo is going to lose, quite obviously. He's an incredibly bad politician, as it turns out. And Mamdani's going to win. But again, like, my view is that, judging from this performance and judging from like the way that this campaign has gone, he's just going to be Bill de Blasio with a beard, basically. That's going to be all he'll be, because what he's going to face is that what he's going to face is that the hammer will come down from the truly powerful ruling class influences inside New York City. And when faced with that, what will happen? So you saw a bit of this when it came to the debate over policing. And when it came to the debate over policing, the past slogans embraced by Mamdani were criticized by Sliwa, who apparently favors like a New York City Police Department with an even bigger budget. So, like, one of the ridiculous things about the debate over the NYPD budget is that, like, the budget is already bigger than some nations' actual defense budgets. It's enough for like a small army, essentially. So the New York Police Department budget at the moment is $5.75 billion, and more than many countries' actual full military budgets. But the interesting thing is, if you look at like a country like, say, for instance, Iran, which is under siege or has been under siege by the United States for decades, like, they spend $7.9 billion on defense every year. New York Police Department has a budget of over $5 billion. So like, Iran only spends just over $2 billion more on the defense budget for an entire country of 90 million people than the New York Police Department gets for policing, so-called, just in the last financial year. So, but that's just an interesting side note. Like, it's an absurdly huge like figure. But the interesting thing about it is that like Mamdani was questioned about like his embrace of the slogan back in 2020, defund the police. And again, like he sort of sidestepped this and basically made it clear in a way, quite honestly, that he had absolutely no intention of doing that. And it reveals fundamentally the absolute emptiness of that slogan and the absolute emptiness of like the DSA and other leftist organizations who embraced that back in 2020. They were all over it, screaming defund the police, etc., etc. Well, what actually happens is, of course, a demand which was never going to be implemented. The capitalist state is not going to defund their principal agency of repression of the working class. It's something which is never going to occur. And all of the politicians like Zohran Mamdani, who put it forward, knew damn well it was never going to occur. It was a slogan that the Democratic Party itself, at the lower levels, embraced to try and cash in on the mobilizations that did take place in 2020, who were genuinely made up of people who were genuinely disgusted by the killing of George Floyd, by the aggressive, militarized nature of policing in the United States, which has not changed, by the way. Now, there was a big arguments between Cuomo and Sliwa and Mamdani about public safety. But the thing you have to point out is that, and I think a lot of working class people in the United States will instinctively understand this, the police are not there for the safety of working class communities. They're not. They never have been. They're there to protect the interests of capital. They're there to protect the interests of the ruling class. And they're there to enforce labor discipline upon the working class by baton and gun if necessary. It's not just an American thing, that's the same in every single capitalist country. That's what the police are there for. It's particularly sharp in the imperialist countries. So the idea that they were ever going to actually do this, carry out this demand, is ludicrous. And again, like the Democratic Party hierarchy, these people are utterly cynical. And I would ask you to recall the article in Time magazine after Biden won back in the 2020. So they published this in early 2021, where they were talking about like, the conspiracy that saved democracy, so-called. And what they were talking about was the fact that there was a coming together of billionaires, of unions, of the American left to save democracy from the evil old Donald Trump. And part of that was taking the energy of street protests and completely stifling it by pushing it into the Democratic Party aligned NGO complex and pushing it in the direction of a vote for good old segregation now and forever Joe Biden, the anti-racist candidate, if you will. And that's the game that the Democratic Party plays, and Zohran Mamdani is part of that game. So he knew damn well when he embraced that slogan that it was something which was just a slogan. It was meaningless. And so now, of course, he's probably going to oversee when it comes down to it, because this is clearly a demand that the ruling class based in New York is going to make. He's probably going to end up overseeing an expansion of the NYPD budget and an expansion of NYPD numbers, would be my prediction, because that's clearly what's being demanded by the ruling class in terms of enforcing order. Now, let's get this straight. Unlike the DSA and unlike the others, the PSL and the other leftists out there, as communists, we have no interest in essentially the working class areas getting lumpenized and dominated by organized crime. That is something which we not only have no interest in, would be opposed to. But we understand, thanks to the fact that we study these things, the fact that the way in which organized crime operates in particularly America, but in all imperialist countries, is that it is part and parcel of the elite structures in the United States. Organized crime, the way that crime is talked about, including by Cuomo, who must know that New York City and organized crime have walked hand in hand together in terms of the elites for many decades, including by, of course, the way that Sliwa talked about crime is interesting because he represents, I think, a quite genuine point of view amongst like certain people in the New York working class and wider working class, that like if you just have like enough policing, then organized crime or crime can be cracked down upon to the point where it disappears. But of course that is not correct, and Sliwa in his own life seems to have found this out almost to his cost when, due to whatever activities he was up to at the time, he became a target for the New York organized crime groups led by John Gotti, because he must have stepped on some powerful toes in his time. So this would seem to be the case. And the fact that like the mafia in New York and the other organized crime factions have existed for so long, and that they've had associations with so many major political figures, tell us that they're still, in their various different forms, a key part of the political structure and economic structure of New York City. So when it comes to understanding things like street crime, like they discussed prostitution, for instance, and Cuomo said, he wants to legalize the sex trade. He wants to legalize prostitution. And I, Andrew Cuomo, as a proud user of the services of prostitutes and strippers, will say this: what the hell is the point of prostitution if it's legal? That's all the frill gone for me, Cuomo didn't actually say that. I'll just give that proviso for legal reasons. But he, of course, that's the kind of thing he might say if he was being honest. And of course, prostitution, drug rackets, etc., these don't spring out of the ground. These aren't just things that like lumpens take up as professions by their own initiative. These are organized, these are very closely controlled and organized rackets that are run in any major city by organized crime figures. Yes, the guy on the street selling crack or selling coke or selling any kind of narcotic, that guy is some lumpen drug dealer who is easily disposed of by his employers, his ultimate employers, who are serious drug racketeers, serious organized crime, multi-billion-dollar operations who rinse their money through banks, including banks in New York City, the City of London, and it goes into various different tax havens, just the same way the rest of the capitalist class's money does. So when talking about, this is why the tough on crime shtick of like a Rudolph Giuliani or a Curtis Sliwa doesn't work to an extent, because what they talk about basically is like Rudolph Giuliani's broken window strategy that was a favorite of his. Is like you get rid of like the visible symptoms. Basically, you get rid of like the drug dealers, on the street. You get rid of like this is Tony Blair's thing in England. It's like, oh, the antisocial behavior. We'll crack down on that. We'll push it where like the bourgeois and the petty bourgeoisie are less affected by it, and we'll marginalize it. Basically, we'll push it out of like the major areas. Still going to be there, of course. It's just going to be there in a way that doesn't create as many embarrassing political controversies, basically. And so what you end up with is more lumpens going to prison, but the serious players who run the drug and the prostitution rackets and the arms rackets and all the other rackets, they just do their business in different ways. That's the way that this works. So that's what would amount to a clampdown on crime in like a New York, Chicago, or anywhere else. It would basically, the two approaches that are on offer to the proletariat are like the Republican approach, the Donald Trump, Curtis Sliwa approach, the old Rudolph Giuliani approach, which is we're basically going to militarize the police force. We're going to basically make more arrests, build more prisons, chuck more people inside, and that will get rid of the visible manifestations of like increased street crime, drug dealing, prostitution, etc. But at the same time, the rackets are still going to get run. The money is still going to get made. It's just going to be done in slightly different ways. So the offer they're making is to hide it. The offer they're making is to push it into more marginal areas. The offer that the left is making is equally appalling, because their offer is basically like, "Hey, fuck it, we're just going to let it all hang out, you know, and we're gonna turn everywhere into Portland, which is a disaster, by the way." Like the way that they've drug legalization under capitalism will only lead to essentially greater control for corporations, greater money being made, and also it end up with like the active promotion of drug addiction by the bourgeoisie. That's like the left's approach. That's the Green Party's approach in Britain. That's like the DSA's approach. Hey, get high and be happy about it. Just like maybe societal decay won't seem to bother you so much if you're off your fucking ass, you know. That's the left's approach to a lot of problems as well. It's also the left's approach basically to homelessness, like, which is that because the left in the United States is embodied inside like the NGO complex, what they have an interest in is really not ending homelessness. Not that you could ever do that under capitalism anyway. But at this stage, what they have an interest in is managing homelessness, managing homeless encampments, running outreach programs in them. And they're not really that interested in actually challenging the cause of homelessness, or exposing that, which is that homelessness is much like unemployment, it's a byproduct of capitalism. You need homelessness in order to further discipline and put fear into the working class. Like, crime is also utilized in a similar manner. Now, of course, Zohran Mamdani is not going to say anything like that, nor is he going to do any of the more outre things that the more sort of wild, degenerate wing of the DSA favors, such as, you know, legalizing prostitution or having open air drug markets. I don't think that would be allowed in New York. I think there would be a revolt of certain elements of the petty bourgeoisie, certainly, if he tried to do that. So this is why I say, like, if he gets into office, and I think he'll probably win, because like Cuomo is such a despised, busted flush that Mamdani and Mamdani being a much more convincing performer, he'll win. But like most of the stuff that would actually infringe in the slightest way upon the priorities of the big New York oligarchs will just simply not be allowed, and they'll organize against it in various different ways. These people are long practiced at diverting things into a dead end, and wait until the Republican Party has essentially reorganized itself in New York, and then they'll probably bring in a Republican at the end of it who is less associated with Trump, more palatable to the middle class. And by that stage, they'll have probably allowed street crime to spiral out of control, blame it all on Mamdani and the Democrats, and bring in the next Michael Bloomberg. Hey, maybe Bill Ackman will try and run for it. Who knows? But overall, what all this revealed was the fact that, yes, there is a desire for certain change within like certain areas of like the New York petty bourgeoisie. Certainly, those are the ones who are the most keen on Mamdani's candidacy. But again, it's going to run into all the same Sanders campaign, so particularly the Sanders campaign in 2020, which is it's going to be it's essentially a campaign which is dominated and tailored around the priorities of like downwardly mobile petty bourgeois types or downwardly mobile labor aristocracy. That's who this is tailored around. It's not tailored because this is the essence of the DSA. They are essentially the left of the Democrats, and the Democrat vote relies more on, I would say, labor aristocracy, petty bourgeoisie in the cities than anything else. Like, this is not going to mobilize a great number of like New York working class people who don't vote at all. Just like even a Sanders candidacy, had he got in 2020 as the nominee, I don't think would have actually mobilized the great bulk of the American masses who just don't vote at all. Because again, it's a campaign which is oriented around the labor aristocracy and left petty bourgeoisie. It's not something which is going to catch on too much, or is not going to catch on enough with the great masses of the American working class. And that's true of all of these American leftist organizations. So moving to our next item on the agenda, and a connected item on the agenda. That is, of course, the No Kings protests. If you've been paying attention to this, you'll know that this is a large-scale protest movement in the United States. It's very much linked to our previous story, which is that which is all about the way that the American left essentially is relating to this anti-Trump wave that's going on inside the United States. And what it's essentially doing is repeating the same mistakes and creating the same problems that it did back in 2017 to 2021. It's playing the same game all over again. Now, what do I mean by this? The No Kings protests, again, had some big numbers attached to it, and got some crowds in like New York and I think on the West Coast as well. But essentially, what this is organizing done by the Democratic Party, and it's organizing done by the Democratic Party on the same using the same basis as they did back in the period of 2017 to 2021, which is get the power again. That's what they want. And the great problem with that is the US essentially a politics of aesthetics only. You see, like the demands of the protesters, which are essentially based on the idea that it's all just about Trump. So it's like they will say like, oh, they'll criticize like Trump's tariffs. They'll criticize his disregard for the law, that most sacred thing for liberals. They'll criticize his crudeness, etc. And they'll even criticize this abstract thing, the bill is, at a certain point. The problem is, of course, that like the issue is, of course, far beyond Trump. Not that like any of the leftists attending these No Kings protests will actually say it, but who actually organized this is the question. It was organized by the Democrats. It was backed by all the Democratic Party big foundations. Its slogans were all about just criticizing Trump and the Republicans, and basically that's it. So the question is like, well, what the hell is the point of any of this? The only point is to promote a vote for the Democrats in the midterms and then ultimately a vote for the Democratic nominee at the next presidential election. That's where this begins and ends, because the protest organizers, and I think actually the great bulk of those attend protests, for them, their demands begin and end with who's sitting in the White House. So, for instance, we had, the grand old fraud, Saint Bernard of Vermont, out there talking about making his usual bombastic speech, saying criticizing Musk and Zuckerberg for funding Trump, etc., and talking this is a disgrace and various his usual shtick, shall we say. So, and what I'm going to do the No Kings March, And because I think this basically sums up all of the problems with it very neatly. Load this up now. Do let me know hearing it. So just bear with me a moment.
It is in danger when we have a president who grossly violates the Constitution by accepting gifts from foreign leaders, including a $400 million plane from the royal family of Qatar, and then allows that family to build an Air Force facility in Idaho. Well, let us be clear. This moment is not just about one man's greed, one man's corruption, or one man's contempt for the Constitution. This is about a handful of the wealthiest people on earth who, in their insatiable greed, have hijacked our economy and our political system in order to enrich themselves at the expense of working families throughout this country. Yes, I am talking about Elon Musk. Jeff.
Right, just going to pause it there because if you didn't catch the first part of that, Sanders is talking about how the accepts gifts from foreign leaders such as the Qatari royal family, and Trump does do that. It must be said that that's true. However, all of this could equally be applied to Biden. Like Biden is one of the most ridiculously corrupt politicians who's held the office of the president. Biden, and we know from the Hunter Biden laptop, was openly soliciting like donations and various different gifts and payments to his family via his son Hunter and his brother, who were going around getting investments in Biden as a political commodity. So what's true about Trump's corruption is equally true, if not just as much, if not more so, about Biden. So like this is the thing about like about Sanders. Sanders would have told you in 2020, in fact he did, to vote for Joe Biden's corpse, despite the fact that he and the entire Democratic Party hierarchy knew very well that Biden's brain had turned to liquefied cheese. Bernie Sanders would have told you to vote again for Biden's even greater corpse-like form in 2024. In fact, he'd already endorsed Biden, again, knowing that Biden was completely incapable of actually exercising the power of the office of president. He knew that. Again, even the likes of that slimy little bastard Jake Tapper had to admit that much later in his book that we reviewed on the Decline and Fall show. So Sanders is being very selective, as always, in where he places his criticisms. And he goes on in this speech. Now, I won't bother showing you the whole thing because it's just a Sanders shtick. He goes on to talk about that the disgrace that Trump is being funded by Zuckerberg, by Bezos, and by Musk. Now, Trump has received funding from Musk, certainly, and they have also, all the three of them have also heavily funded the Republican Party in the last couple of years. They've also dumped gigantic amounts of money into the Democratic Party. Bezos and Zuckerberg and Musk all funded Democratic Party candidates across the last decade. Bezos gave $100 million recently to the Obama Foundation to fund the building of that monstrosity known as the Obama Library, the Obama Presidential Center. So again, what's the problem actually here, Bernie? Is the problem the oligarchs funding political parties? in general, or is it that they're just funding the wrong party from your point of view? Because they're like all of the capitalist class bankroll various different political projects for the purposes of advancing their own class interests. So why is it a problem when it goes to their side and not a problem when it goes to the side that you essentially do represent, Bernie, which is the side of the Democrats? He goes on to say that in his usual way, that the billionaires have expanded their wealth to a giant degree, which is true, they have. But they also expanded it under Biden. They also expanded it under Obama. They also expanded it under Clinton. Again, all presidents that Bernie Sanders told workers to vote for. So again, it's clear that old Bernie, his problem isn't really with the power of the oligarchy, nor is it with anti-worker measures. Let's also remind ourselves that Sanders and the clowns in the DSA, including a congressional group, such as it is, the so-called squad, presided, or should we say, were part of the greatest strike-breaking exercise in recent American history since the days when Ronald Reagan powered the federal government to break the air traffic controller strike in the early 1980s. The Biden administration, and we can assume Biden would have been fully on bin compos mentis, have presided over the forcible implementation of a shit contract for railroad workers, and essentially using the federal government to break their strike, because the U.S. capitalist class was facing something which could actually have a really severe impact on profits, which was a national railroad workers strike. Biden dutifully used the power of the government, and the Democrats all lined up with this, with a few exceptions, to push through the greatest act of strike breaking in over 40 years. Bernie, and this will go around, and include Zohran Mamdani in this as well, will still vote Democrat. Despite the fact that the Republicans would, of course, done the strike breaking too. They might have done it even. But the fact is, if you're telling, as Sanders is, that the US workers, that Trump is this great and dire threat to our democracy, well, a lot of workers in the United States are going to call bullshit on that. But know very well that they've been getting the rough end of the deal, so to speak, from the Democratic Party for decades, including under Bill Clinton, including under Obama, where there was a lot of talk about the great economy. And this links to our next item regarding the AI bubble, where there was a lot of talk in the 1990s about how great the economy was, how labor productivity was increasing and improving all the time. And of course it was. And all the gains for that went to the ruling class. For the American worker, there was no real wage expansion has actually taken place. In reality, if we look at the long-term trend since the early 1980s, what's happened is, there's been different sections of the American working class who have got better deals at various different points. But the overall trend has been stagnation of real wages, including when the US economy was doing its best performance during the 1990s in recent years, when the American worker just simply went into more debt. This is the nature of the Democratic Party. And this is what Sanders is there at this No Kings demo to tell you needs to come back. And so is it any wonder that many American workers are going to look at that, and they're going to look at the Republicans and think, well, fuck both of you. And that will be the entirely correct response to have. So Sanders is up there conning people. He's up there pretending also that it's just the Republicans who trample all over the Constitution. Both the parties of the oligarchy trample all over the Constitution, because if it was seriously implemented, it would get in the way of the decision-making process which the capitalist class requires in a late-stage imperial economy and state, which is rapid decisions involving no democratic scrutiny whatsoever, to transfer large amounts of funds around, and to have no real debate, no real scrutiny over anything whatsoever. That's a objective need of the U.S. ruling class constantly, and so that's why the basically gets used as a doormat by everybody in the U.S. political system. The idea that it's just Trump doing it, it's just this bad guy Trump, again, is such a fucking lie. And Sanders is up there fucking lying to people again. So given that this whole thing, this whole No Kings thing, its demands are liberal at best, its politics are pro-imperialist as well. Because if you look at like the way in which like they're conducting themselves, the organizers and the spokesmen, women for this, are all vehemently anti-Russian, vehemently pro the war on Russia, and they're also vehemently anti actual existing socialism, including, of course, Mamdani denouncing Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua. And this, again, like it pulls people out into the streets to support a politics which supports the major priorities of US imperialism, including the ongoing war on Russia. So the question arises then, what the hell was the great bulk of the US left, other than the ACP, doing, going out there and supporting this shit? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Now, many of them, if they've read this, will cite the fact that Lenin said that one should go where the workers are at all times, move amongst them, even in reactionary manifestations like this, and look to bring people over to your side. Now, this is true. This is something that Lenin, of course, did say quite correctly. So if there's workers at these mass demonstrations, should American Marxists go down there? Well, first of all, the question has to be asked, are these actual workers turning out? Or is this a demonstration of the American petty bourgeoisie? Petty bourgeoisie being a useless class, which you can't actually build anything on. The best thing the petty bourgeoisie can do is follow along in the slipstream of the proletariat and adopt proletarian ideology. Now, the way in which this has gone with the American left is, of course, they aren't doing that. What they're doing is opportunistically jumping on the anti-Trump sloganeering and on some stuff in their leaflets about, and we must fight capitalism. But in reality, what they're doing is they're jumping on these demonstrations to essentially not put a proletarian point of view, not really. What they're doing is they're just jumping on the anti-Trump stuff, trying to make an immediate gain to their organization in terms of numbers, and just echoing Democratic Party talking points. That's what the PSL always do. It's what the DSA always do. And they don't represent bastions of proletarian ideology in the United States. What they present is essentially like the radical left face of bourgeois politics. The DSA are open about the fact that they're going to lead all of their followers back into a vote for the Democratic Party. The PSL will do the same thing. They'll just do it whilst shouting and screaming a lot more ultra-left sounding slogans. This is the nature of the entire US left. Just default back to voting Democrat. And again, like that isn't building a proletarian politics at all. What it's doing is essentially reinforcing one half of the oligarchy, one half of the US political oligarchy. And the question has to be asked, why, what are you in this for? Why are you there? What are you hoping to achieve by going to these protests where the ideology is bourgeois, where the attendees, seemingly looking at the New York demonstration, just in terms of the pictures, seem to be mostly petty bourgeois or labor aristocracy? So what is the point? And the point is that these leftist organizations just want to recruit some more students, some more petty bourgeois types. They want to keep their organizations going for a few years, and they do that best by essentially acting as the left face of the Democratic Party. That's all this is. Just the same way in Britain, most of the so-called Marxist organizations act as the left face of the Labour Party and continue to do so. Now it's diversifying a little bit because you've got the wretched Greens and maybe your party, or maybe it's their party, getting in on the act as well. We'll see how that goes in terms of development. But again, and we keep having this discussion, the limit of the imagination of the political vision of the US left is essentially voting Democrat and hoping against hope that welfare capitalism emerges again. This has been their response to everything. So if you look like the last 20 years, 25 years even, in US history, what have you had? What have you had in terms of developments that could favor conceivably a leftist type organization, or even like a social democratic organization with with serious commitment to backing class struggle? Now, assuming, of course, we know full well of the sort of viciously anti-communist nature of like US bourgeois society. We know all that, and we know that the US state will come down like a ton of bricks on anything that looks like it's going to be a successful socialistic project of any nature, especially if it's one that's drawing in significant numbers of working class people. But we know all that. But there's been many different events over the last 25 years that have favored the reemergence of some kind of American socialism. I mean, you have 9/11 itself. You have the rapid collapse of the government's official story afterwards. You have the Iraq War and that becoming incredibly unpopular. You have the stock market crash of 2008 to 2010. You have the long period, which we're still in, of economic stagnation. You have the decline in real wages of American workers. You have the mass repossessions of housing and the foreclosure crisis. You have the very clear and obvious disillusionment of vast swathes of the American population with both of the parties of oligarchy. And in all that time, how have the forces of the American left exploited the situation? Have any of them really managed to make an impact in the working class? The answer is no. Yes, the DSA got a lot of recruits. Someone in the chat correctly mentions COVID lockdowns as well. Because why is it that none of these organizations have actually made any breakthroughs? Because the limits of their vision are for the re-emergence of welfare capitalism. That's what they want. And so their default position is to essentially say, we're going to push things from the left. We're going to push things from the left in the Democratic Party. How's that gone? You've had an objectively favorable situation for over 20 years in terms of the degeneration of the US economy, the degeneration of the US bourgeois politics, the American working class coming to despise the bourgeois politicians of both parties. Yet what does the American left do? When the Democratic Party strategists bring out a new face to revive their wretched party of oligarchy, Barack Obama or Ocasio-Cortez or Zohran Mamdani, what does the American left do? Falls over on its back and screams, yes, now's the time, Now we're going to push them left. Now we're going to have some real progress. Remember, the DSA endorsed Barack Obama, gave him a lot of support early on, despite the fact this guy was clearly a slimy opportunist who would not do anything to challenge any of the fundamental bases of a ruling class power, or even to alleviate the situation facing American workers in the mildest way. And yet the DSA kept on endorsing him anyway. Same is true for all of the DSA's recruits post the Sanders campaign in 2016. They gained a lot of numbers. Again, made little to no impact inside the American working class. Again, the limit of not just the DSA, but all of these other organizations, barring the ACP, is that they want welfare capitalism back, and they want the place of the now threatened labor aristocracy and should we say radical petty bourgeoisie restored within a new system of welfare capitalism. That's why they backed Obama. That's why they will back any Democratic Party candidate who vaguely hints that he's going to go in that direction. Therein lies only destruction. Therein, in this, only lies a further alienation from the working class. It is an absolute dead end. And yet they still keep pursuing it. Remember, the objective conditions for welfare capitalism inside the United States and globally have disappeared. You can't have that anymore. The economic structure for it just simply does not exist. So the way in which that they keep going on this absolutely absurd fucking merry-go-round is obscene. Given the challenges facing the American worker and given the fragility and instability of the American economy, to keep on with this strategy, it says to me the leaders of these organizations, DSA, PSL, etc., Freedom Road Socialist Organization, these people are all complicit with the criminality and the wretchedness of the Democratic Party oligarchy. They are tools of the ruling class, as the ruling class themselves proudly boasted of in that Time magazine article back in 2021. They're a tool of one particular faction of the American ruling class, just as the MAGA guys have ended up becoming a tool of another faction of the American ruling class. This is a dead end. And I would say to offer some praise of the ACP, at the very least, like the ACP have seen through this farce. Now, whether they can build the kind of organization that is needed, again, only history will tell. But at least they've broken out of this absurdity that the American left indulges in, this ridiculous, like, not only counterproductive, but treacherous strategy of the American left. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to take a quick pause before coming to our final story. Just hang on for a moment and I'll return to you. Be sure to like and share this stream if you have not done so already. And I'll be back to you in just minutes after I've grabbed some water. So give me a moment. Welcome back, everybody. Here we are again, and we're going to be just taking one question, jumping the gun slightly at this stage. It's from Ash in the chat, who asks, what do you think of Marxists joining DSA or your party who know it won't work, but do it in order to find people to recruit for local and Labour campaigns? Well, see, being someone who did this myself in the Labour Party days, back in the Corbyn era, I can comment on this with a degree of knowledge. Look, what you end up doing in these parties is you end up essentially in not doing any of the things that you think you're going to do. What you end up doing is an endless faction fight which was true in the Labour Party. And the faction fight, by the way, wasn't even with like the Labour Party right wingers. It was with like other elements of the left mainly. So you end up in like a mass in these social democratic parties. You end up in a massive fucking faction fight a lot of the time, and so you end up like not doing the actual organizing that you say you want to do, and which a lot of people do want to do, because you end up in a constant battle for influence within the organization, and that's what you ends up consuming quite a lot of your time. So that's one thing. The second thing is to look at this from the point of view of like, well, what are you, if you're trying to find people to work with, are you looking in the race? This is a legitimate question to ask. By going into broad social democratic parties, are you actually meeting the people who can mobilize amongst the working class, organize amongst the working class? Or are you meeting people who can mobilize and organize in such a way amongst like the lower petty bourgeoisie and the labor aristocracy? Because these are different things, and I'll expand upon my reasoning here. What we're faced with now is like similar problems to that which faced Lenin and others in the period of World War I, which is where like the hierarchy of the working class movement in the imperialist countries had all swung behind their different ruling classes. They were all on board with various different with the war strategies of the British, French, Belgian, German, Austrian, Italian ruling class to one degree or another. And Lenin's answer to this was that the hierarchy of the working class movements in the West had essentially become hopelessly corroded by imperialism, and that you needed to go, to use Lenin's phrase, lower and deeper into the masses. Now, what does that mean in our context? And it's a problem that keeps recurring, certainly in the imperialist countries, over and over again, which is, well, who are we looking to actually work amongst? Are we looking to work amongst like the labor aristocracy? Or are we looking to work amongst like the great masses of work? Unfortunately, those are two distinct things now, and have been for quite some time. And what you generally find, and I experienced this myself, is that when people who are supposedly Marxists say, "Oh, well, we need to work amongst these mass organizations to win people over to Marxism," well, what you end up doing is, in actual fact, working with people who, in the modern era, are really in it to essentially deliver a rebirth of welfare capitalism. Now, the argument back from Trotskyites and others, and some so-called communists, would be, but we need to go where the masses are, and the masses are moving to your party. By the way, 13 years ago, I had a Communist Party guy argue to me that the masses were moving to the Green Party. The masses did not move to the Green Party. What moves there is really the left activist base. And that's the mistake that people are making, is they are mistaking like the left activist base for the masses. And this is an easy mistake to make, because the people who are in the left activist base are the ones who organize the great bulk of the demonstrations. They're the ones who reach through trade union movement or voluntary organizations. In this country, it's mainly the trade union movement, but other associated bodies. They can get a certain turnout on their demonstrations. They can get a certain reach into the working class. And what Trotskyite organizations, and others as well, so-called communists as well, have typically tried to do is to win influence within that activist layer. And therefore, by winning influence within that activist layer and within the bureaucracy, the justification is, well, then we can use that influence springboard to gain more wider influence in the working class. And also that some of these people are close to our point of view already and can be won over to Marxism relatively quickly. In my view, this is a completely false proposition now, and I think it always was. Because what happens is, even under more favorable circumstances than this, the one that we're in now, what happens is, when communists organize themselves in such a manner, what happens is you do not pull these people to the left, they pull you to the right. Let's use some concrete examples. So the justification for, again, I'm going to mention something I come back to over and over again, the adoption by the Communist Party of Great Britain of a reformist line in 1951 was that they would, due to the circumstances in old perfidious Albion, that the best approach for communists was to essentially look to get a coalition with the Labour Party in order to elect a left-led Labour government that would take on the power of the monopolists with a strong communist presence behind it. What happened? Well, what happened was that the Communist Party became more and more reformist. The Labour Party, of course, drifted more and more and more under the pressure of the ruling class over to an even more reactionary position. It was always anti-worker, but it drifted further and further away from even offering small reforms. And the Communist Party got dragged right along with it, because it had tethered itself to the Social Democratic Party on the basis that that's where the working class were and would always be there in perpetuity, and therefore we needed to keep saying vote Labour. And they removed themselves as a potentially revolutionary, militant party of the working class. Now, this, I use the British example, but this happened in all of the countries of Western Europe, in all of the imperialist countries. Now, how does this have relevance now? I can hear people in the audience asking, how does it have relevance what happened in 1951 vis-a-vis our situation in 2025? Well, the answer I would give to this is that the same process will be in play, the same pressures involved. The pressures that dragged the communist parties to the right and into just straight up economism in the 1950s and 1960s were a combination of the relative success of welfare capitalism, the ability of the Social Democrats for a certain period after World War II to offer reforms. The problem with attaching yourself to that was that when the Social Democrats fell into disgrace amongst the working class, as they started to do as early as the 1960s, then it left the more militant end of the working class nowhere to go. Hence why they joined Trotskyite organizations, anarchist organizations, etc. And what should have been the vanguard of the working class got fractured. Here I'll come back to the point to answer Ash's question. Like, what as communists should we be doing now? What is our challenge? Is it to rebuild broad workers' organizations that can't deliver any reforms? Or is it to build a revolutionary vanguard? The answer is the latter, because the broad Social Democratic Party doesn't even have the appeal that it did in like the 1950s due to the brief period of successful reforms. As we've talked about many times, the historical context that produced that has gone, which is expansion of capital, expansion of profits post World War II, the pressures of the successes of the Soviet Union, the pressures of an armed and determined working class that had gone through 5 or 6 years of war, who were determined to get reforms one way or another, necessitating, through that unique combination of conditions, a reform period which has never been repeated before or since. So by attaching yourself to a social democratic organization as a communist, what you are doing is not building towards communism. What you are doing is essentially you are providing a Marxist cover for a failed opportunistic social democratic politics. Now, what we should be doing, and again, this is not an easy process by any means. It is not an easy process. What we should be doing, though, is building small but very strong and ideologically coherent communist parties whenever we are active, that recruit into them like the best worker militants that we can find and develop them into strong communists who can, a strong ideologically properly trained, organizationally trained communist can actually intervene into working class movements in a way that a watery social democrat cannot. A good knowledge of Marxism-Leninism as a method, not just as an ideological tool for analyzing capitalism, but also to guide our organization and and how we intervene into the working class movement. That gives you a power far greater than an infinite number of Trotskyites and social democrats, if done correctly. And again, our task at this stage is to find and recruit the best worker militants. I say to all of you out there that the best worker militants will not be in your party. They will not be in the fucking Green Party. They will not be in the DSA. They will not be attracted to the No Kings protest. They won't be there. They won't be there because the angriest and most potentially revolutionary sections of the masses in the West aren't looking to social democracy anymore. Who is looking to social democracy is, again, left petty bourgeoisie, labor aristocracy, or downwardly mobile ex-labor aristocracy. This isn't where you can build a communist party from. This is where you try and engage in the illusion of rebuilding social democracy from. Albeit many people will say, oh, we need to appeal to these people. You don't appeal to these people by pandering to them. You don't. The appeal will come when militant workers' action starts in a serious way that is not controlled by the bureaucracies. If you look at like the big strikes taking place, or like the relatively big strikes taking in, say, Britain today, say like the Birmingham bin strikes, for instance, as the analysis from the CPGBML has correctly pointed out, the workers there have had like effective roads to win this battle foreclosed already by the trade union leaders who fear they fear victory, I think, but they also fear legal action from the state. So if you went for, say, like all-out strike action, for instance, over a period of time, you could conceivably win like a refuse workers' strike, given the pressure that would bring upon the city authorities and the wider government. But again, the trade union leadership won't do that. So as long as the trade union struggle remains firmly under the control of the trade union leadership, like trade union struggles will remain in a dead end. It will break out of that eventually because the situation will reach a point where the working class's struggles cannot be constrained anymore, and the mechanisms of the state and social democracy, which has methods of control built into the state for it, or it helped build these methods of control of workers' struggle into the state machinery. Eventually, workers' struggle will break out of that. And we need to ensure that we are the ones who are going to the working class and telling them, this is how you break out of this maze that the state and the social democrats have put you in. And a lot of workers will instinctively grasp that they're being fucked over by the trade union leaders and by the Labour Party, or by the trade union leaders and the Democrats. The point about all of this is, and again, to come back to Ash's question, in the question that it needs to be asked, who are you appealing to? If you're a Marxist and you want to go into your party or the DSA, who are you appealing to? Who are you going to be working with? The answer is not the best militants of the working class. That's not who you're going to meet there. I know, I've been in the your party milieu long enough. Who you're going to be appealing to is, again, to re-emphasize the point, labor aristocracy, petty bourgeoisie. That's not who's going to lead these struggles. As the rate of proletarianization increases, again, to go back to Stalin's point, you'll get an increased number of people who are pushed into the great mass of the proletariat who do not have a proletarian consciousness. Stalin used the example of a former petty bourgeois, small businessman shoemaker, again based on his own father, who got pushed into a shoemaking factory in Georgia, and had to go through a painful period of consciousness adjustment as a result. This is the period we're going through with these leftist organizations, is a manifestation of a labor aristocracy being pushed into the broad masses of the proletariat, more or less, and trying desperately to find a political project which will get them out of it again. And that's what your party is. That's what the DSA is. That's what ultimately the PSL is. It is an attempt by the labor aristocracy to escape the crisis of capitalism. That's not what we're interested in. It shouldn't be what we're interested in. We must make an initially small, but again, like solidly organized, ideologically well-trained organizations which recruit and work amongst the working class and recruit the best working class leaders to become active Marxist-Leninists. And when we have done, if we have done our work well, and again, this is, I cannot emphasize enough how difficult this is, but if we do the work well, then when the class struggle increases, the people who have come through our organizations and been trained properly will find that their words are listened to by an increasing number of workers. This will not be the case if you are active in your party or any of these leftist organizations in the United States or elsewhere. Again, the path we are on is longer and it is more difficult than anything that the reformists and the Trotskyites are getting involved in. But in the end, all they will end up doing is essentially providing left cover for opportunistic social democratic politics. That's the ultimate destination of those who go into these organizations: disillusionment, despair, or opportunism. So that's to that question. Again, I would not expect those who have a serious investment in your party or anything else to embrace that. I would not expect those who have decided that this is the shortcut back to a mass organization to understand that. But that is the only way forward now. The way forward is not the attending No Kings protests. It just isn't. there. Hope that you all got something out of that. Now I'm going to move now to the question of the stock market bubble, or I should say the latest stock market bubble, because we've had several over the last few years. In fact, we've had a series of bubbles going back all the way to the early 2000s with the original, well, not the original, but like the original stock market bubble of the last generation, which is, of course, the dot-com bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s, which blew up, almost a quarter of a century ago now. Now we are faced with a gigantic bubble, one that actually dwarfs the dot-com bubble. And that is, of course, AI stocks of the Magnificent Seven big American tech companies. And this is, of course, should be no surprise if you read Marx Capital Volume 1, if you read Value, Price and Profit, then you can see that the bourgeoisie always get very excited by new labor-saving technology. Now, by labor-saving technology, let's start off with the fundamentals here. What do we actually mean? What is labor-saving or increasing labor productivity refer to? Now, as Marx says in Capital Volume 1, and he talks about the machine's purpose for the capitalist is to increase the amount of the working day that is dedicated toward, of the worker, which goes to the profit of the capitalist, and decrease the amount of the working day where the worker is working for themselves. That is the essence of how the bourgeoisie sees technology. When they say it's a labor-saving device, in reality, it's a wage-saving device. How do different waves of technological innovation actually work? Marx, again, outlines this in Capital Volume 1 quite comprehensively. He also goes into it in Value, Price and Profit. I think he covers it in Wage, Labor and Capital. Those are the two pamphlet-sized books which are worth reading if you want to get into something before heading into the rather more heavyweight reading of Capital Volume 1. So the way that technological innovation works under capitalism is that the capitalists are always looking for a way to, again, increase the length of the working day, or increase the amount of the working day that is dedicated towards generating profit for them, and decrease to the minimum amount possible the amount which the worker is working for themselves. That's what technological innovations are used for under capitalism. So when you got the innovations in the British cotton industry in the mid to the early to mid 19th century, what that was designed to do was to get rid of skilled workers who used to be able to wield a certain amount of industrial power, because if they withdrew their labor, then the machines would stand idle very quickly. So these people who develop a certain amount of industrial power throughout capitalism are always a concern for the capitalist, because, well, they could, if they went on strike, do some severe damage. It's why, the capitalist class is so obsessed with fully automated trains, for instance. So what they do, particularly, and Marx goes into this in his writings of the 1850s, what they do when they're faced with a series of strikes by workers is that they immediately they get spurred on technological innovations. And the technological innovation is there to, again, like get rid of higher paid, potentially more industrially powerful workers and replace them with lower skilled, lower paid, more exploitable workers. That's the game. So the way in which these waves of technological innovation happen is that there is a new piece of technology emerges. A load of workers who could have demanded decent wages are laid off. The reserve army of labor grows. Downward pressure, more downward pressure can be brought to bear upon the conditions, the wages and conditions of the existing working class. And when that's been done, you can then, as the capitalist, make sure that you can then move to re-employ or employ new layers of workers working in the new factories you've got, or the new workplaces that you've got, whose job it is to run the new technology, and who are running essentially simplified production lines, or of one form or another, by flicking switches and pushing buttons, whereby the skills of the previous workers who have been laid off because of the new technology, those skills are now embodied in the machine, and the machine is operated by, in Marx is talking about the innovations in the cotton industry, is now operated by women and child laborers rather than men, who are at that stage are more easily exploitable and can be made to work longer hours. So this is the point of technological innovation under capitalism. It's called a labor-saving device. In reality, it should more easily be called a wage-saving device. It should also be mentioned, and we've talked about this before, that to call this current software that's available, like ChatGPT, etc., to call it artificial intelligence is a fraud. It's not artificial intelligence. What you've got there is, and again, it is an innovation, but you've got like advanced pattern recognition software and search capabilities that can generate more complex responses to questions. So again, it's an innovation, but to call it artificial intelligence is not correct. It's not thinking. Again, if you look at like an AI generated answer to a question, and again, you can see this on something like DeepSeek, which again is an open source from the Chinese. You can see you ask it a question. What it does is like a hyper fast search through the various different sources, and then it takes it and then delivers the task. And again, that's an innovation in of itself, but it's not. Machine isn't thinking. It's searching amongst pre-existing sources, and it's bringing you the result in a manner that you've asked for. Again, is an innovation, but it's not the innovation that the capitalists are presenting it as. Now, why is it that the US capitalist class is getting, and not just them, but others too, are getting so excited about machine learning, should we say? Let's not call it AI. Let's give it a more accurate label. Well, but for the same reason that they get excited about any new technology or development technology, they think that they can use this to essentially refloat the flagging US economy, and it is a flagging economy. They think that machine learning technologies can replace current layers of the workforce, maybe those that are able to, especially those that can make wage demands that the capitalists might need to respect due to their position in the production process. But also, if they can reduce work down to the pushing of buttons and the clicking of mice, clicking of the buttons of a mouse, then again you can get rid of higher paid, especially administrative workers, and replace them with a lower number of workers who are just powering the AI. Oh, sorry, wrong phrase. Powering the machine by inputting terms, checking results, etc. So, for instance, something like the translation business, machine learning could essentially not wipe that out, but render it a much lower paid occupation. Decent translators used to be able to command like a fairly decent wage, particularly if you're thorough and very good at it. Now the machine can do the great bulk of the translating work, but of course the work is imperfect. It gets phrases wrong. It translates words incorrectly. The context of whole sentences can be thrown off. So what you do in that case, if you're an employer, is you'd use the machine to do the translation, and then you use a human to come in and check the machine's work on lower wages. So the saving there comes in at the stage of, or the profit comes in there at the stage of you now are employing a series of workers on far less money, checking the work of the machine. Again, this is a very old process. This is what always happens in capitalism. It always comes back to how do we employ humans to work for lower wages? How do we extend the amount of the working day which is dedicated towards generating profit for us, and reduce down to the bare minimum the amount of the working day that is dedicated towards reproducing the employee, reproducing the worker? That's how they see this ultimately. And this is what they're counting on, is a vast implementation of machine learning all the way across the U.S. economy that will enable them to carry out vast amounts of firing of workers, create a much bigger reserve army of labor, and therefore use that as downward pressure on the rest of the working class to create a situation where they can lower the cost of labor across the board by having like a vast reserve army of the unemployed, which they can then use. That would be the plan of the more thinking end of the capitalists in the United States. Now, a lot of these people involved in the marketplace, they're not thinking, they're following a trend. So you've got the people who actually clearly understand the system, and there are a number of capitalists who read Capital Volume 1, 2, and 3, and maybe beyond that, to actually understand their system better. And they clearly understand what they're doing. The rest of them are just following along behind. And the rest, it is essentially like lemmings running over the edge of a cliff. So the amount of investment going into machine learning, shall we say, is gigantic in the United States at the moment. So like this bubble is huge in terms of the amount of capital that's gone into it. So across 2025, for instance, 80% of all the gains in US stocks so far have been in, shall we say, tech stocks that are associated with what is referred to as artificial intelligence. We know from our previous discussion that that's not what it is. So it's also caused foreign capital, to principally European, but others too, to flood into the United States. So at least $290 billion have been invested in like the stocks of the so-called Magnificent Seven tech companies just in the second quarter of 2025. And foreign capital now owns around about 30% of stocks in that particular marketplace. So this is like a giant bet on artificial intelligence. So to give you an indication of scale here, this bubble is 17 times the size of the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. It's 4 times the size of the bubble that was the subprime mortgage market in 2007. And this is an astonishingly huge bubble, even by the standards of recent years. And this continues to go up in terms of being inflated. But what's also been revealed is that virtually all US growth in the past year has not come from the rest of the economy. It's come purely from the valuation, or indeed massive overvaluation, of these stocks. So for instance, the AI infrastructure investment has risen by $400 billion since 2022. Like the data handling centers are one of the key growth areas in the US economy. In fact, there's been recent protests inside the United States, I believe in Indiana, about data processing centers being built there that would absorb gigantic amounts of the already scarce water supply in that particular state. So the rest of the US economy only grew in the last year by 0.1%. So all other growth in the US economy came from these tech stocks. So again, like this is a huge bet that is being placed by the US capitalists and others on these delivering the productivity gains that they think that they can get out of them. So without the spending on machine learning technology, there would have been no growth or even recession inside the US economy over the past year. So this is a absolutely gigantic bubble. Should also say that the US labor market, and this is part of the reason why Trump wanted to fire the senior person at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, US labor market is also looking pretty fucking bad. Like youth unemployment in the United States is now at 10.5%, the highest it's been for a while. Job vacancies for younger people have fallen by 30%. AI exposed occupations have experienced a decline of 13% in terms of job openings there. Also, in terms of the wider economic picture, only the top 20% of the top 20% income bracket in the United States is actually still carrying out large amounts of consumer spending. The other 80% of American households have been spending less and less because they have less and less to spend. The downward pressure on their wages has increased and increased for many, many years. So retail sales have flattened out. U.S. manufacturing has actually been in recession for over 2 years, driven by, amongst other things, the vast cost of electricity. And of course, we have the additional factor on top of this of the Trump tariffs. The Trump tariffs, which aren't affecting China, but they are affecting the price of goods on the shelves in the United States, because the natural instinct of many capitalists is to pass these costs on to US consumers. Because if they don't pass the cost on to US consumers, ultimately they will be pushed towards the profitability disappearing. And if the profitability disappears, then, well, the board and the CEOs of these companies aren't going to last too long. The shareholders will demand their heads on a plate. So this, in actual fact, is a massive bet by the US capitalist class that machine learning is going to usher in a new era of hyper exploitation of American labor, driven by the fact that they will have a vast army of the vast reserve army of labor to draw on, and a continual downward pressure on wages can be exerted as a result. Again, this is the same game that has been played for over 200 years. This is what always happens. The difference now is that this is a huge speculative bubble that is in place here. And again, it follows numerous bubbles going back over 25 years into the 90s, where you've had a high degree of monopolization inside the United States economy and across the Western Bloc, where there's been huge numbers of mergers and acquisitions. The number of companies has shrunk down and down and down. And also at the same time, you've had continued bubbles as these monopolies look for profitable outlets for the gigantic amount of capital that they're producing, that they're sitting on. And certainly since 2008, with this giant crisis of profitability that's existed in the United States, what's happened is like low rates of business investment, but high numbers of high amounts of capital being chucked into various different stock bubbles. This is the latest one, and this is the one that the capitalists have convinced themselves are going to be their way out of the dead end that American capitalism has found itself in, because American capitalism, other than these AI stocks, is simply not growing. So it's why that there's two things going on. One, you've got the American ruling class betting everything internally on the machine learning being the next big thing that will give them the huge boost in labor productivity to restore profitability to the capitalist system inside the United States and beyond, of course. And also, to come back to one of the subjects we talk about a lot here, why they cannot abandon their war upon Russia, and why they cannot abandon their drive towards ever greater aggression against Russia, Iran, and China. Not only do they require new technologies in place that can more effectively hyper-exploit labor in the United States, but also they require the destruction of one or more of those aforementioned countries who have come to oppose them in certain ways regionally and globally as well. So the bubble will burst, just as the dot-com bubble did, just as the subprime mortgage bubble did. Again, it's a desperate attempt to seek out both profitability and the potential profitability of increased labor productivity that machine learning could bring them. This is what is going on here, and this is behind the wild frenzy, that and the overall picture of long-term American economic decay that is going on inside the United States right now, and has been, the decay, of course, has been there for a long time now. And so the desperation of the capitalists is palpable, and the instability of the US economy is there for all to see if you just dig beyond the headlines. Right. So we have, let's see, how many of you watching now? Be sure to like and share the stream if we have not done so. If you have not done so, or let's just take a quick look here. We have over 500 of you watching now. That's X stuff. Thank you everybody for joining in. So the show today has gone in a somewhat unexpected, well, twisted around somewhat. We sort of did the political discussion about organizing inside the imperial core nations earlier on in response to Comrade Ash's question. So what I'm going to do is going to draw this to a close in just a moment. I'll be back with you tomorrow for the another episode of the Decline and Fall show. It's the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Accords coming up, which ended one phase of the war on Yugoslavia. So we're going to be talking about that with a special guest tomorrow, interview to be out later in that day. Be back with you again, same time, 1 p.m. for what's going to be the regular show on Wednesday of this week. So be sure to join me for that one. What I'll do tomorrow is I will clip this episode down into more digestible parts, shall we say, and have that put up on the YouTube page. Now, the full show, edited and with sound quality improved, will be going out as an audio podcast for those on the Patreon side of things. So be sure go over there if you want to support this project. Thank you to the over 500 of you who have already joined, and I will return to you again tomorrow. Again, be sure to like and share the work if you can. I will be back with you again tomorrow, but until then, thank you, and here is your usual video outro.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжается бой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.